checking you can hear me okay.
Yeah, I can hear you, Steve.
Okay, so Laura will be online in a minute with a couple of slides. Just to introduce myself first then, Steve Allen. I'm the GIS product owner for in Severn Trent. Product owner means I get to play in a Scrum team to do the big development of GIS across the Severn Trent estate. We have moved to a agile process for delivering change using scaled agile framework, and that's really working well for the big stuff. But for the smaller stuff, we still continue to have a GIS team as business as usual, where people like Laura, and mostly Laura, are able to configure apps at very short notice and get them out for users. So when we went into lockdown a year ago, nearly a year ago, we quickly identified the need for an application to help some of our colleagues who are stuck at home to get out and do some useful work. So here's a slide which shows a case study that's been written and is on the Esri Resources website, and it's a little bit of a summary of what I'm going to talk about, a little bit of a teaser, and then just got a few additional slides to go through. So water leakage is not a value that you can measure. It's what's left over once you deduct from the volume of water that you put into an area, once you deduct all of the accounted for water. And one of those accounted for is an estimate of water being used by properties, and that's affected, of course, if the property is thought to be void. So we gave Collector to employees who are stuck at home but needing to get some exercise to find void properties. In the centre is the usual sort of dashboard, and on the right hand side is the benefits that we're going to come to. So just to explain that that big blue circle is the way in which we badge everything GIS in Severn Trent. We call it GIST. So if Laura or I inadvertently talk about GIST, it's not a typo or mispronunciation, it's just our badge for ArcGIS products. So the usual background of Severn Trent Water as a company: 4.6 million households and businesses across our patch, 2 billion litres of drinking water delivered each day, 3.2 billion of wastewater. The reason for the wastewater being bigger is that in the centre of our patch we do have the company called South Staffs Water, who provide water-only services, and we do the waste. And actually we're now two companies. Severn Trent split into a English licensed provider in England and a Welsh licensed provider in Wales that we call Hafren Dyfrdwy. So it's actually two separate companies, but we provide the common services of GIS to both. When we went into lockdown, Severn Trent Water, and I'm guessing in the same as all other water companies, decided not to furlough any staff. We continued to operate as best we could, working at home. I would suggest very efficiently, working at home without any staff furloughed. But we wanted to have rewarding work that could be done by people who were then working at home and getting their hour of exercise. That was the government advice at the time. We already had an application called Love Our Network. Pay attention to this a little bit now. So we introduced a new app called Love Our Network. It looks fine when you write it, but trying to pronounce it differently is a bit of a struggle. The hour was the hour of exercise that staff who were stuck at home might want to get each day, and here was something useful for them to be able to do while they were getting their hour of exercise. So we called it digital transformation, I think, earlier. I'd call it digital disruption. We disrupted the way in which the process of publishing and collecting data changed. So we've changed from spreadsheets to paper maps. So there's one of our younger employees enjoying herself reading a paper map that has been drawn by her father, manually putting dots on the map where the void properties are thought to be, to go and inspect them and see whether they really are void. And then, of course, moving that up into a mobile app. And there's a very fine hand holding a mobile phone with a collector application running on it, showing a base map, showing areas of the organisation that we call district metered areas, and then showing dots on the map where the void properties are to be checked out. So over to Laura.
Thank you, Steve. So all of our mobile apps follow the same data flow in some form or another. So in this instance, we took 78,000 records from our billing system that were classed as void and loaded them into ArcGIS for desktop in a CSV format. Unfortunately, our billing system does not hold grid references, so we had to join that data to our address data layer using the UPRN to get the XYs so that we could add them on a map. We then created a file geodatabase with a simple structured schema and loaded the void properties into that. That was then published into ArcGIS Online, where we configured the web map and pop-ups ready for our void hunters to go out and start collecting information. So overall, it took us a few hours to configure the app from start to finish. And once we were getting results back in, we could export the data and send it back to our billing team for them to process. Next slide, please, Steve. Thank you. So here you can see a few screenshots of how the Love Our Network app looks. We kept it simple for our users, only asking them to answer 2 questions, so property status and whether the property was a household or non-household, both using drop-downs to make it really quick and easy. And we also added a comments box for users to add anything they thought might be useful. So the void properties started off as a pink dot on the map, and then they changed colour depending on which property status they chose. So this enabled all users to see which properties still needed to be visited, and it gave a real-time view of progress to all users and managers back in their working from home offices. For users living out in more rural areas who had signal issues, the app could be used offline and they would be able to sync their edits back when they had Wi-Fi or signal access. So we refreshed the void properties in the app a few times, which showed the users that the data they were collecting was being processed and that they were having a positive impact. As users were finding the app so easy to use, we got some suggestions for other things it could help with as well. One was to help with internal sewer flooding investigations. And we added a layer of sellers and asked users to check if the property did in fact have a seller whilst they were out looking at voids. And the idea of this was to see if there was a link between internal flooding events and whether that property had a seller. Next slide, please, Steve. Thank you. So here's a screenshot of the operations dashboard we configured, and this shows the status just before we refreshed the data for the first time. This was shared regularly on our internal Yammer page, along with a league table for the top void hunters, which did start a little bit of a competition amongst a few people, which was really interesting and great for the rest of us to watch play out. It was also a great way for the leakage managers to quickly see how it was going and how the stats were looking. Back to Steve, who will talk about the benefits we saw.
Thanks, Laura. So what were the outcomes? 550% increase in surveys undertaken. So that's comparing using collector, digital, mapping, mobile phone, palm of your hand compared to spreadsheets and possibly paper maps. We found 38% of those believed to be empty properties were actually occupied, and we were able then to get those into the charging mechanism, getting the bills out to them and getting the volume of water being used by those properties into the leakage calculation, which is where the leakage angle comes from. Positive employee morale during the lockdown. So I'm going to read out a message that I got, as you can see, 16:28 one afternoon, from one of my colleagues. The whole concept of Love Our Network is amazing. In my own district metered area, we now have 1 void property with 49 when I started. This helped me identify strategic issues such as allotments and other buildings, sports halls, ex-council facilities. My kids enjoyed it to start with, and it helped me with my general health and well-being with 100,000 steps a week. Decent data is the foundation for everything. We will never reach our true potential without first understanding our data, and secondly, using insight from that data to drive business decisions and in turn customer outcomes. Steve Witter was at the time our head of leakage and was an amazing sponsor of the Love Our Network. opportunity and was out there himself leading the way. He didn't make the #1 spot. He was actually third in the count of the number of void properties checked out during the cycle last year. And right, what this also gave us was, and this is something that Laura and I work on continuously. Laura mentioned Yammer, that's our internal intranet collaboration tool, was to get a wider appreciation of how GIS connects people to data. And that really did work. And this is a little cloud map of applications that Laura has configured. How many are there, Laura? Probably still on mute. Over 50 collector applications configured in a couple of years. Very quick turnaround with them. We have a limited number of licenses that we need to recycle. So we spin up a collector app for a particular project and then close that down and move on to the next one. Thank you. That's our little presentation completed.